Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Caroline, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Bryce. It is a special day.
It is. We get to do a bonus episode of Overdue Finds. We don't get to do these very often, but when we do, it's always fun. And especially today's topic. I say a few times over the course of the year, like, these are my favorite episodes to do. Like, obviously, our best of the year. And one of the other ones, of course, is our March Madness preview, which I can't believe, by the way. This is the 6th annual EPL Overdue Finds March Madness tournament. 6 years.
I saw that on the notes, and I thought, somebody needs to fact check, Bryce, because that can't be right, but it is.
It is, yeah. Time flies. Like, it doesn't feel like we've been doing the podcast for that long still. And yeah, it's so cool that we get to keep doing this. People seem to be enjoying voting for their picks. And of course, you're tuning in today. It is the first day of the tournament. And our tournament theme this year is Best Sequel.
I wish I had the confetti cannons, the air horns, to shoot off the confetti cannon of my heart.
Yeah, this year it was fun kind of going through the list and trying to figure out which 64 titles we should include. How do we organize everything? That was a big one too. And yeah, I think we got it all figured out. But yeah, today, of course, we're not going to do our Overdue Finds picks. Today's all just about the March Madness tournament, which, of course, starts today on Friday, March the 1st. So if you're not familiar with our March Madness tournament, for the entire month of March, you can go to our website, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages to vote for your favorite choice to determine the best sequel. So you can download your bracket at epl.ca/podcast. And you can also share your picks on social media by using the hashtag EPL March Madness.
Now, I know that this is our kind of preview episode, but I don't want to derail us too much, but just as with last year, where we had the question of what makes a villain, I think you could apply that same thing to this year with, like, what makes a sequel. And I would be absolutely down if any of our listeners want to email us, podcast@epl.ca, because we could really get into, you know, what's a sequel, what's a spin-off, what's a series. I think it's fair to say that we took a loose interpretation to have a broad cross-section of titles this year.
Yeah, we really did because, as you can see, if you check out our bracket, you'll see the prequels, spin-offs, and more category. And, for some of them, obviously, it was very easy to come up with, like, of course, there's movie sequels. There's sequels to books. Video games was a big one. That's why it's got its own kind of bracket this year. But yeah, it's funny because, like, you start thinking about titles like, for Frasier as an example. Like, obviously, it's for TV shows, it's considered it's a spin-off of Cheers. But is that a spin-off actually a sequel, or is it continuing the story? And I mean, yeah, you can kind of go either way on it, but I truly believe that the prequels and spin-offs definitely belong in this tournament.
I do too, and I think that it's just an interesting thing to consider, when you look at these items, whether it's a movie, a book, a comic, as an individual, as part of a series. There are different rules involved with it, but it's an interesting thought process that ultimately gets us talking about great items, many of which you can borrow from the Edmonton Public Library.
Yeah, absolutely. And then even for some of the titles in here where, like, for example, Super Mario Brothers 3, that would be cool if we lent out copies of the original Nintendo cartridge. But we do have other titles associated with that. We've got history of Mario Brothers. We can look at art from it and a bunch of other Mario games. So yeah, we were a little bit more loose this year, I think, with our criteria for what should be included for sure. But it's all about, hopefully you get to explore our collection at EPL. So Caroline, before we start talking about our picks, let's chat briefly about the whole brainstorming phase of trying to come up with titles, because just like, recording this episode is one of my favorite things to work on, so is just kind of coming up with the whole March Madness bracket and matchups and all of that stuff around it. We've got an awesome team here who helped us brainstorm some titles. Not only our Overdue Finds family team, but also staff across EPL. We got so many suggestions for great sequels to include. But Caroline, I have to ask you, what do you personally think makes a great sequel? And when we're doing this brainstorming phase, were there any titles that just immediately this has to be included?
I think I've been thinking a lot about this, no surprise. And I think for me, I go back and forth between a sequel needs to bring something fresh. It needs to take a story and do something interesting with it. At the same time, I've talked on the show, I'm a character reader. So once you've established the characters to something, you could honestly have them sitting in a coffee shop and that would be the sequel and I would watch or read it. So I think a really successful sequel, in more general terms, does do something fresh, takes the story what am I trying to say? Unravels? No, reveals more about characters, about a situation. But for me personally, I think once you have established strong characters, you would just kind of follow them anywhere in that, or I guess to some extent the same type of, once you've established a world, like you have something like Starfleet, so you have Star Trek The Next Generation, doesn't have any recurring characters who are original to the series, but it's still within that same environment for the show. And I think the first ones that came to my mind were I don't want to say the classics, but I'll say the obvious ones of Godfather Part II, Empire Strikes Back, Indiana Jones. These pretty solid. If it's got Harrison Ford in it, it was going on my list.
Yeah, when he's involved in a sequel, it's pretty good, although we won't discuss the fourth Indiana Jones movie.
Oh, I've never seen it.
Good. You're not missing anything.
In the past, we have been stricter about having one title from an author or an actor or something that kind of limited it, and this year we don't kind of have that same thing. There's multiple Mario titles on here. There's different we've got Superman represented in one side, and then Batman over in a different category. There's different things at play here. Could you imagine if we said there's only going to be one MCU movie on this? I think there would have been a riot.
Probably, yeah, because we got lots of suggestions, and I mean, over the last probably close to 15, 20 years now in the whole MCU, we've gotten so many great sequels out of that. So yeah, it would be very hard to determine, okay, this is the one that's going to represent all of them. Yeah. So yeah, we do have 2 Batman titles in there, but they're both deserving, and same with, I would also argue the Mario Brothers ones too.
As would I, and I think that there's room and a place for both Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan and Star Trek: The Next Generation on the brackets. Personally, I love Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, but I think 2 was probably the right choice.
Yeah, that's what also is kind of tough with coming up with these titles is it's hard sometimes to, you have like in your heart, like, oh, this is, to me, this is the better movie. But then sometimes, when we're organizing this, we got to take a step back and be like, well, yeah, maybe I do enjoy Star Trek 4 more. Actually, I would say I would probably enjoy Star Trek 6 more. The Undiscovered Country, I think, is a solid movie. But at the same time, though, I think, universally, it's kind of known. It's, most people would consider Wrath of Khan to be the best, and it's kind of still to this day held as the standard almost of Star Trek movies.
Yeah. So, what was the brainstorming process like for you? Which titles jumped to your mind?
Well, I think I posted this kind of internally when we were getting picks from staff. I kind of have a Mount Rushmore of sequels that for me automatically meant like these titles are definitely going to be going in. And I think these are sequels that more so universally everybody just kind of accepts as being great. Terminator 2 Judgment Day, The Godfather Part II, as you mentioned, Aliens, which you could, some people may make the argument that it's maybe a better movie than Alien. I'm not so sure about that, but I think they both stand on their own. And of course, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is actually the third movie. Although I will say, as a kid, I loved Temple of Doom. That was my Indiana Jones as a kid. I've it's still pretty good. I find it to be very entertaining, but Last Crusade to me is the superior Indiana Jones sequel.
I think I've seen Last Crusade like twice as many times as I've seen the original Indiana Jones
Raiders
movie.
Yeah.
And so when I went back and was watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, I'm like, when does this happen? And it doesn't in that movie. So that has kind of become my go-to Indiana Jones touch point. Was there a certain sequel that you were upset didn't make the tournament? There's 64 titles. It couldn't just be our favorites. Were there any really hard cuts for you?
Yeah, there definitely was. And I mean, the ones that I'm most upset about not making, like I'm okay with it. Like I've come to peace with our decisions that we made to include certain titles in the tournament. A couple for me that I would have loved to see in there. First of all, being Dawn of the Dead, the George A. Romero version from, I think it's like 1984 or something like that, or else also to the Zack Snyder remake from 2004 was also really good as well. Just a classic zombie movie, of course, set in a mall. Probably one of my, definitely my all-time favorite zombie movie for sure. And there's been some really good ones over the years. But yeah, I would have loved to have included that movie. We don't have it in our collection, and I think I was probably the only person to vote for it. So I was like, fine, we will leave Dawn of the Dead off the list this year. And for video games, we've got some great series represented here. Like God of War and Uncharted 2. There's lots of, seems like PlayStation series. And as somebody who's not a PlayStation player, I'm like, even as somebody who's follows games, I'm like, okay, like we need to include God of War. Like I understand its impact. We need to include Uncharted. I personally would have loved to have seen Mortal Kombat 11 included. We do have a fighting game in there still with Street Fighter 6, but yeah, I would have loved to include a Mortal Kombat game, mostly because of just how big of an impact that series has had on gaming. Like I remember when the first one came out and how huge that was in the arcade, but the sequels, didn't quite I would say, I don't want to say live up to the expectation of the first one, but like the first one kind of came out of nowhere. And, you know, to this day, Mortal Kombat is one of the biggest gaming franchises of all time. And more on kind of a funny pick in our books category. Caroline, you might agree with me on this one. I thought it would have been kind of funny to include Gump and Co., the lesser known Forrest Gump book sequel that came out after the movie. Is I don't want to say it was like a cash in on it, but from the reviews I've read, it kind of sounds like it was.
Yeah, there were definitely some book series that I think we kind of have captured the series titles, but those big sequel ones, you know, once you're past Doctor Sleep or the Testaments, there weren't a lot of like really high profile successful book sequels, and that kind of surprised me when I was looking at this. I guess things really did shift more to that series model in publishing.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you would know more about this than I do, but it seems like more so like the series stuff is kind of like the more so in the YA category, it seems like. Anyway,
YA and genre, I would say. You have something like the Game of Thrones series that, or the Lord of the Rings that, you know, have been popular for a number of years. But yeah, we definitely in the mid 2000s, 2010s saw with Twilight and Hunger Games really successful series in both print and in movies.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say too, the other one I was going to vote for, but I didn't, as far as books go, would have been maybe a Dark Tower sequel from Stephen King, because that's also another series too that I know he's not big into sequels, but kind of Doctor Sleep being really the exception. But yeah, I kind of view it as more of a Dark Tower is more of like an ongoing series, but I wasn't the biggest fan of that series anyway myself, but we could have made an argument to probably include a Dark Tower title in there, but I think we got it right. Was there anything else you think that we should have included?
Well, just a quick mention. I think we've mentioned this in the past, but Harry Potter saw 2 wins in 4 years. So it was retired out of March Madness. So that's why you might be wondering there isn't a title on there. I really thought if I was going to play the card, this has to be on the list. And ultimately, I just really liked our picks so much that I thought, no, this is good. Personally, Grease 2, I think it is an underappreciated movie that does some interesting things with it, and I would have loved to have seen it on there. Legally Blonde 2, Red, White, and Blonde, it is not in our catalog and not in our collection, but that's something there. Sister Act 2 would have been another solid choice. I think something from Lucy Maud Montgomery. I was looking at maybe one of the Anne sequels, Anne of Avonlea, either in the book or the Megan Follows mini-series, because it is just kind of the culmination of it, by the time you get to the bridge scene, you're just like, thank goodness, finally. And then I was thinking too, it's not a title for me, but the Return to Oz, I was thinking, maybe that could have had a place in here, but actually I'm not sure if we have that. So lots of potential, but mine were kind of just like weird one-off things, and ultimately I think the balance that we have is pretty great.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think, and we'll get into this a little bit later on in our roundtable questions, but maybe, I know this, I think was a listener suggestion a few years ago, doing the tournament, having like more cult titles to it. And to me, like Grease 2, correct me if I'm wrong, that seems like it's more of a cult title as far as like sequels go.
I will allow that interpretation. I think that there can be a case for that for sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting because already then I'm like, oh, I was thinking after uh, we recently had Twin Peaks Day, which is February 24th, and then I was thinking, oh, Twin Peaks The Return would have been an interesting one on there, but then you've also got Fire Walk with Me, which would absolutely be on the cult one. So I think maybe there's like a gateway from sequel to cult or cults following.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. So one of the interesting things about doing this, like from our standpoint anyway, is, you know, kind of creating those matchups. And of course we have everything ranked because, I mean, let's face it, we don't want to have, you know, in the first round, Godfather Part II against Terminator 2. Like, it just doesn't make sense. That's why when you look at the bracket, everything is ranked, and we try and have everything lined up perfectly that way. But in that first round, we have some really tough matchups. Caroline, when you're going through and filling out your bracket, for you, what were some of the toughest first round matchups for you to pick a winner from?
The first one that I kind of came and paused at was Paddington 2 versus Toy Story 3. And I think they're just really well matched on that. They kind of speak to the same things, emotional connection with them, both kind of seen as really solid continuations of the story. So Paddington 2 and Toy Story 3 was one that the first time kind of my pen really paused filling out the bracket on that. And yeah, I think that may have been one of the most challenging ones. I think I have Empire Strikes Back going to the second round, but I think in any other matchup, John Wick Chapter 2 would have done fairly well on that.
Yeah, that was a tough one as well, just to kind of look at on paper. I'm like, to me personally, it was like, oh, Empire Strikes Back is the easy pick, but I mean, John, that whole series is awesome. And also too, John Wick 2 was recommended for us to include, and that was another one too where I'm like, actually, you know what, I'm more of a John Wick 3 guy, but two works. They're both awesome.
Yeah, so that's with the first round, you've always got some classic ones in there. I think another one where I thought, oh, we're really looking at different sides here was X-Men Days of Future Past up against Mouse Volume 2. But X-Men is so steeped in, at least the movies, I'm not as familiar with the source comics, so steeped in the experience of the Holocaust that actually it's a really neat kind of matchup ultimately. It might look a little odd on social media, but I think there's something there.
Yeah, whenever we have, you know, I joke around all the time. My all-time, I think, favorite March Madness moment was in our very first year, where it was best
books to
movie
movies.
Adaptations.
Yeah.
And kind of as we got down to the kind of final rounds, it was Schindler's List versus Guardians of the Galaxy. And we got comments on Facebook where, you know, if you logged into Facebook and you weren't following this tournament and you just see, you know, the library's like, what's better, Guardians of the Galaxy or Schindler's List? You might question what's going on here. But yeah, some of those matchups kind of do get funny sometimes when you see them on social media. Yeah, Mouse 2 versus X-Men Days of Future Past is I had that listed as one of the hardest ones to pick. I would say Days of Future Past is easily my favorite X-Men storyline and also X-Men movie as well. So yeah, that one's tough. I ultimately, for my own bracket, I picked Days of Future Past, just because, Mouse 2 obviously is it's important, and I would list it among the books that I think everybody should read at least once, but I don't necessarily consider it to be like a sequel per se, just kind of a continuing of the story. So that's ultimately why I went with that one anyway. But as far as some of the other matchups go, the two that were really tough for me in the movies category, one was Aliens versus Home Alone 2: Lost in New York. I mean, I love both movies. Home Alone 2, to me, I would say it's not the greatest sequel, just that it essentially just rehashes the first movie, but it's still like so entertaining to watch. So I have a hard time voting against it, but I ultimately chose Aliens. And the other one for me, probably the toughest out of the whole thing, was the first round matchup of Blade Runner 2049 versus Back to the Future Part 2. I absolutely love the Back to the Future movies, as we've talked about them a lot here on the show. But Blade Runner 2049 is such a good movie from beginning to end. And just the way the movie looks, everything about it is great. Like, technically on paper, it's a better movie than Back to the Future Part 2. But I chose Back to the Future Part 2 just because, I mean, it's just so iconic how they go into the future, and they also go back in time, and the whole idea of like, oh, the 1985 we're going back to isn't the same 1985 that we came from. Just everything, the way they describe time travel, it's one of my all-time favorite movies, so I went with that one.
Blade Runner 2049, Harrison Ford.
That's right. Yeah, I totally forgot about that.
I also went with Back to the Future too. So, and then I was thinking of it. I was thinking if it was made today, I could definitely see it being stylized as Back numeral to the future. And so then that led me down the path of wanting to give shout outs to two of the probably most famous, iconic sequel stylizations. One of them being Too Fast, Too Furious, which really shook up the game. And the other being Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo. So neither of those are on our matchup, but I think we need to recognize all that they have brought to pop culture discourse.
Oh, big time. And we could have also made the argument that a Fast and the Furious sequel should have been on the March Madness list. But, looking at what we have, I'm glad that we were able to include a title like Before Sunset, because it's not a movie, it's not a traditional sequel that, it doesn't have 2 in the title, but I like that it's diverse that way.
So there are definitely going to be some upsets. It wouldn't be March Madness without it. Is there a higher ranked title that you could see getting knocked out in an early round?
Yeah, that Paddington 2 Toy Story 3 matchup that we talked about, that one I think that's my most anticipated. Like, I can't wait to see how the public votes for it. I personally think Toy Story will win just because it's kind of the more well-known franchise. I personally have never seen Paddington 2. I've heard nothing but amazing things about it, and I actually do want to watch it just based on the feedback, just all the reviews I've heard on it, and just word of mouth from other people. So I could see Toy Story 3 knocking off Paddington 2. That would, if I had to put money on that, by the way, that would be kind of funny if our March Madness was included in like some of those online sports betting apps like DraftKings. DraftKings, if you're listening, let's do this for next year.
We need to make a commercial that can run during the hockey games.
Yeah, lots of explosions in the background, money falling, and yeah, definitely. And then the other, I could also see, just talked about this one, Home Alone 2, I could see maybe beating Aliens. Just, I think Alien should win, but I could see Home Alone 2 knocking it off. And in the video games category, it's going to come as a surprise. I could see, just more so based on how popular it is right now, like today, the amount of people playing it, I could maybe see Baldur's Gate 3 beating Mario Kart 8, which I know sounds shocking even as it came out of my mouth. I'm like, really? But more so kind of the recency thing, like it's like, I think it just won Game of the Year. Ton of people are playing it online. So, yeah, I could see possibly Baldur's Gate 3 maybe knocking off Mario Kart 8. But Mario Kart 8 is so beloved, it'd be really tough. How about you?
Yeah, I think the movies, there were a couple in there. I think Terminator 2 is going to prevail, but Top Gun Maverick had a lot of love with it. I think if we did this a year or two earlier, it would have been blowing it away. I think Hannibal and Watchmen, I could see Watchmen pulling ahead there. And depending on who comes out and votes, the Hunger Games catching fire and the Silence of the Lambs. I could see the Silence of the Lambs pulling it out, but I also see Hunger Games. So there's a lot that are really kind of toss-ups, and it could affect the whole rest of the brackets, once if we have an upset like that. So I can't wait to see how people vote and what the results are. I am always very surprised each year.
I am too. It's fun to watch the polls on social media as well. I'll occasionally go back in the evening and be like, oh, why is this title winning? This is not right.
Yeah. Or the one
it is
like looking at it for on Facebook or Twitter or the website, or like compared to Instagram and who's voting on there, and just the different audiences and people. Yeah, so vote. You can vote on each of the platforms, and your vote could really make the difference.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't vote every day on every platform.
Why wouldn't you?
Exactly. All right, so gotta ask, who do you have in your final four and ultimately winning?
Okay. So I have in the movies bracket, I'm going back to the Elite Eight on this. So I had Aliens pulling out against Empire Strikes Back, with Empire moving into the final four. I have Star Trek The Next Generation in my prequel, spin-offs, and more. That one was a journey because I honestly didn't know how that was going to play out until I was playing it. In games, I have Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which I don't know. I was voting a lot on name recognition and things I've heard people talk about and ones that I was familiar with. So yes, Mario was heavily represented in my Sweet 16. And then up in books and comics, I had a couple rounds back The Dark Knight facing off against Thor Ragnarok, and then once Ragnarok took it, it was just like a smooth thing to the quarter final or the final four for me with Ragnarok, because I just think it saved the Thor franchise. Like Thor was at with the second one.
That second one is probably my least favorite Marvel movie. It's awful.
And then what it did, bringing in Taika Waititi and the tone of it and how it kind of repositioned it, I just think both as a sequel, as a movie, as a part of the MCU, I really feel that Ragnarok is a good sequel in there. Anyway, In my final, I have Empire Strikes Back facing off against Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, with the Empire Strikes Back taking it.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I was doing it, and my reaction was like, okay, I guess this is what's happening.
If I would have guessed, somebody would have been like, Bryce, can you guess what Caroline will have? Maybe just as her final. I would have honestly thought Frasier would have been in your final.
Yeah, so Frasier I had in the first 2 rounds until it went up against Star Trek: The Next Generation. And I think that as a spin-off series, still really like it. Would happily do a Frasier episode if it comes down to it. Would love to talk about it all day, both the idea of it having it being a spin-off of Cheers, and then the new Frasier series being a revisiting of it. I love Frasier and will happily talk about it, but I don't know, when it went up against Star Trek: The Next Generation, I think what that did in a new generation. Oh, and also Degrassi: The Next Generation was one that I thought about after. You could have had Degrassi High, you could have had, Degrassi Junior High technically itself was a continuation, so we could have had an all Degrassi bracket on here.
That would have been great. The music from Zit Remedy.
Yep. Yeah. And Gowan.
Oh yeah, lots of Gowan.
Okay, so that was mine. A lot of your favorites were going up against each other in that movie bracket. So who emerged out of your into your final 4?
Okay, so I'm going to do similar to you, Caroline. I'm going to kind of back this up a little bit and start with my Elite 8. So in movies, I had it down to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Ultimately, I picked Terminator 2 to go to my final 4. And then in the prequel, spin-offs, and more, I had Watchmen going on quite a run, and then up against Better Call Saul, and ultimately chose Better Call Saul to also go to my final 4. And then in my books and comics series, this was a tough one. I had The Dark Knight up against Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, and went with, even though I love The Dark Knight more, I went with Return of the King. And in the games category, it came down to the 2 Mario titles, Mario Kart 8 versus Super Mario Bros. 3. Believe it or not, I went with Super Mario Bros. 3. So in my final 4, I had Terminator 2 up against Better Call Saul, and I went with Terminator 2. And over on the other side, Super Mario Bros. 3 up against Return of the King. I had Super Mario Bros. 3 winning that one. So in the final, 11-year-old Bryce would have been excited. It was Terminator 2 Judgment Day versus Super Mario Bros. 3. This is going to sound as kind of maybe a shocking winner, but I went with Super Mario Bros. 3 ultimately to win this whole thing. Now, personally, do I think that will happen? Probably not. This is just my personal voting on it. But like that game, it's hard, unless you are maybe of a certain age, it's hard to maybe understand like how much of an impact that game had for so many of us who were growing up during that time period. It was kind of like one of the last big titles for the original Nintendo. We got Raccoon Mario out of it, which you've seen in games today. Just everything about it. If you look up a lot of best Mario game lists, most people do have Mario Brothers 3 as the top one. Some people make the argument for Super Mario World, which was like the first game to come out with the Super Nintendo. But to me, Super Mario Brothers 3 is always going to be the greatest Mario Brothers game. You got also Bowser and all of his family members also making a first appearance in this one. So I love everything about it. So I don't think it'll win. That would be my personal pick to win, though.
The music too in Mario Brothers 3. The graphics, just the way it changed. And I think you can also look at Mario Brothers 2 as an example of, what happens when you make a sequel that has introduces a bunch of new characters, has a setting and a plot completely unrelated to the first one, and really was just taking a name and inserting it into another property. You need to there's so much to talk about with Mario Brothers 2, but as a sequel I would not say it's successful particularly, but as the bridge to 3, for sure.
They kind of totally went back to their roots for that one. And Super Mario Brothers 2, it's so different than the other ones, but in a good way. I still will occasionally, I've got an old Nintendo here and a copy of Super Mario Brothers 2, in the box and everything. I still love going back and replaying that game. But Mario Brothers 3 for me is where it's at. So that's who I have winning, but we'll see what happens.
Oh, I can't wait. I just got so excited on this. I think there's so many great choices and so many different ways it can go. So I can't wait to see how people vote. Before we get to our roundtable questions, can you let everyone know what we'll be chatting about on our next episode coming out on Friday, March 8th?
Yeah, Edmonton is home to some fantastic writers, and we've been so lucky to interview quite a few of them on this very show. So on the next episode of Overdue Finds, we're going to be speaking with local writer Delaney Tiedemann about her new YA novel, The Jump, which asks the question, if you could travel to your past, present, or future, where would you go? So, we're going to do kind of a new series here, more of a local writer spotlight. And, we're excited to be chatting with Delaney.
Yeah, I loved the questions that this book raises and just the opportunity to think about what that might mean for your life. And we love on Overdue Finds anything that is time travel adjacent. And I would say that time jumping would be included in that.
Yeah.
So our first roundtable question, what title deserves a sequel but never got one? Sounds like a riddle almost.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. All right, so I think I may have brought this one up before, but I would have loved to have seen a sequel to Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Now, I will add to this, I think before I'd pitched the idea of Ferris getting a day off of work, which still to me needs to be the focus of the movie. But I'm going to create a little bit of a spin on it, and it's going to be more so centered around the character of Cameron and how Cameron, after the events of the first movie, was maybe his life changed and he's kind of more of the carefree one now, and he's got to kind of roles are a little bit reversed in this one, and he's got to convince Ferris to skip a day at work, come out and enjoy the day with him. So that would be mine. Caroline, how about you?
Yeah, I'm definitely in that John Hughes era because the first thing I thought of was Breakfast Club. And I think you can definitely have that next generation piece. Maybe the original characters are now the parents of the next 5 kids that are in detention. I think there are some commonalities with what the original kids would have been experiencing or feeling and having going on in their lives, but lots of new stuff. I also don't want this to be made because really, do we need it? But I think the story is is there. Although I did not do the math on this, it could be quite possible that soon it would be the grandchildren of the original characters, and that also we don't need to go down that path. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say probably would be grandchildren, but
yeah.
Who knows?
Or it could be like retro set. Like it could have been set at the time. So Breakfast Club was 85, around like early 2000s maybe.
Yeah.
But made now, looking back at like a retro thing. I don't know. You could play with time, you could play with it, but also no one else is John Hughes, so should we?
Yeah.
Probably not. What would you like to see as a theme for next year's March Madness tournament?
Okay, so I've got two ideas in mind. One I think we brought up before. Maybe it's a little too similar to last year's with Best Villain, but heroes versus villains. So every single first round matchup would be that hero versus that villain. So it would be Batman versus the Joker, Superman versus Lex Luthor. It'd be more than just comic book characters, but I like that idea. The other one, and I don't know how we would do it, I would kind of like to do best of the worst. So instead of you voting on your favorite title, maybe every day you're voting on your least favorite title. So I don't know. We'll see. How about you, Caroline?
I still think, I don't know what the theme is, but I think there is a place for like same character or same actor face-offs. I was joking earlier about Harrison Ford. I know we've talked in the past about like Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, Colin Firth versus Mark Darcy, Colin Firth from Bridget Jones' Diary. I think, I mean, it's kind of the same with heroes and villains. You would just have it for the first round, but then to kind of see like who goes on further from that, I don't know, maybe we could have a whole Harrison Ford bracket. I don't know. There's something with like same character or same actor.
Yeah. I like
all
that.
The Batmans against each other.
Ooh, that would be controversial for sure.
Yeah.
I would have
Edmonton
some strong
Public Library
opinions on
is
that.
not afraid to go there.
That's right. That's right. Well, and hey, you know what? If you have any suggestions for future March Madness tournament themes, email us at podcast@epl.ca. We've got a running list here internally, but I'm sure there's a $1 million idea out there, and please email us and we'll share it on a future episode. We would love for our listeners to share their picks with us on social media. You can download your own tournament bracket at epl.ca/podcast. And of course, you can vote for your favorites every day on our website and on social media at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And of course, don't forget to share your bracket by using the hashtag EPL March Madness.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you automatically get all of our new episodes, including bonus episodes like this one. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We love getting reviews. Maybe you can share what you're looking forward to in March Madness in the review. And as always, please tell a friend about the show and challenge them. Have a March Madness face-off.
We're going to have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. So we'll have a list with all 64 titles that are represented in the tournament. Of course, as we mentioned, we love to hear from our listeners. So you can email us at podcast@epl.ca. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.